Today we're taking a look at the latest news and rumors from around the NHL. It looks like the Chicago Blackhawks are going to be entering a full-scale rebuild. We also have the latest on Jake Debrusk in Boston, as well as Claude Giroux with the Philadelphia Flyers. Plus, we have news from the NHL waiver wire. We have several prospect signings today and some news out of the KHL. With everything going on in Ukraine, it looks like the league could have some pretty big implications. We'll discuss all that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of NHL news and rumors to discuss here today. First up, we have news from the waiver wire. Yesterday's players, which included Perlini and Lindbaum, both cleared. Now, in Perlini's case, he can be reassigned to their minor league affiliate in the AHL. And in the case of Lindbaum, he was signing with the Florida Panthers after coming over from the KHL out of Europe. So certainly he needed waivers to also be assigned to the NHL roster as well. So he's both cleared. They can both carry on with what they were intending to do. And as I mentioned as well, today being March the 1st, there's a lot of prospect signings. Because of the date, a lot of undrafted players or prospects can sign and have their contracts be effective for next season. So all these entry-level deals will only kick in at the beginning of the 22-23 season. And that includes the Tampa Bay Lightning signing 21-year-old Bennett MacArthur, an undrafted left winger from the QMJHL with the Acadie Bathurst Titans. So he signs with Tampa. The Capitals signed 20-year-old Henry Rybinski, who's a right winger. He was originally drafted back in 2019 by the Panthers, but never signed. So he's now eligible as a free agent signing. So he signs with Washington. He's been playing with the WHL Seattle Thunderbirds. The Dallas Stars have signed 20-year-old Antonio Stranges, who's a center and a winger, so he can play either position. He was a 2020 fourth-round pick of the Stars, and he's been playing with the London Knights in the Ontario Hockey League. Some of these guys actually had a chance to play a little bit in the AHL last year as well, in the case of Stranges, where he wasn't eligible to play in the OHL last year because of the lack of games and the league was shut down. So some of these guys do actually have a little tiny bit of a pro or minor pro experience. The Calgary Flames assigned 19-year-old center iceman Rory Cairns, who was a 2026 round pick. He's from the OHL Sioux Greyhounds, so he signs with the Flames. The Penguins have signed a pair of players, including 21-year-old undrafted goalie Taylor Gauthier, who's from the Portland Winterhawks in the Western Hockey League. And they've also signed 20-year-old Jordan Fresca, who's an undrafted center playing with Kingston Frontenacs in the OHL. And then lastly here, the Seattle Kraken have signed 20-year-old Ty Kartai, who's a left winger, undrafted as well, also from the OHL Sioux Greyhounds. So certainly a lot of signings there on today, March the 1. Now, the KHL had some pretty serious issues, as I've talked about yesterday, with all the implications of the sanctions and everything being placed on Russia due to everything going on with the ongoing war in the Ukraine. There's a lot of potential outcomes here that we might see take place. Now, of course, today the KHL Twitter account was posting about the fact that they're back and their playoffs are going to start, and they got a ton of really, you could call it hate, I guess. There was a lot of hateful comments. Obviously, a lot of people supporting the Ukraine, obviously posting a lot of comments that were unfavorable towards the league. And you have to think that, like I said before, that there's a lot of impacts here financially that are going to have some impacts here. Now, for example, we heard on TSN's Insider Trading tonight from Chris Johnston indicating that there's several foreign players that they don't really want to be over there during this time now that things are at war over there. So a lot of fairly prominent foreign players want out and have started the process of terminating their contracts, and they could be out of the league here over the next few days. We've already seen a couple of teams refuse to participate, the ones that are not directly right in Russia, like Jokerit and Finland. So clearly there's a big impact. So some of their foreign players are fairly prominent players. Like an example would be Shane Prince, for example. He's rumored to be looking to get out of his contract. So a lot of these guys may not be sticking around. So it's certainly getting a little bit messy. And as I mentioned, because of the devaluation of the Russian ruble and the money and everything situation over there, like, you have to wonder their financial long-term implications here. Obviously the Russian Federation obviously prefers to keep their players over there, and if they could, instead of coming to North America and joining the NHL, that would obviously be their preference. And obviously, if there's any situation that may not allow like junior players to go play in Canada in the Canadian Junior Hockey League, or if there's any issues with them playing at U.S. colleges or any of the programs in the United States, there might be some say, okay, well, you know what, that's not really hurting Russia as a country because they prefer to keep their talent over there anyway, even though it might limit the player and have an impact on the person. It's not impacting the country as a whole, so why bother doing it? And there might be an argument there, but that's not really what we're getting into here today. But ultimately, at the same time, though, if the league loses enough money because of the currency devaluation and all the sanctions, you have to wonder if it could hinder their ability to carry on. And I think the long-term viability of that league has to be in question. If you get enough players that are refusing to play, teams pulling out, the owners losing money, it could come to a crashing halt, and it could happen fairly quick. So you have to wonder the long-term implications there. But certainly not a surprise to see a lot of foreign players, not really wanting to be there due to the situation, which you can certainly understand. Lots of tension, and it's not a place you really want to be during a time of war. I know I also seen today that CCM is essentially kind of pulling out of their deal with Alex Ovechkin. They're refusing to use Russian-born players in any of their marketing material for the foreseeable future. I seen that was posted earlier on social media. So certainly, it's all over the place. Like, there's also a lot of pressure on Ovechkin too. I see a lot of people questioning the fact he still has the picture up on his Instagram with Vladimir Putin. Clearly, he's been a very open and vocal Putin supporter throughout his career, obviously, because Putin's been in power there a long time. And I know a lot of people would like to see him speak out more, but I understand why it's such an awkward situation. And, I know he said no more war, and he's kind of getting a lot of heat for not being more outspoken against the situation. But I do have to think that some of these players honestly are scared to speak out. So let's kind of keep that in mind, and their family's safety and security, as well as another big concern of theirs. But this situation is far from over. Hopefully we can get this situation, come to an end peacefully here as soon as possible. But still, there's a lot of sanctions are going to be held against Russia for some time, I'm sure, because of the aggressiveness and the violence, and obviously attacking a country who didn't do anything. So obviously it's some tough times ahead here for everything involved when it comes to hockey and connected to Russia at this time. Now, as I mentioned, we have some NHL trade rumors to take a look at here today. A couple quick updates. One on Jake Debrusk. We know that he formally requested a trade to the Bruins earlier this year. Of course, he had a heck of a game last night, scored his first career hat trick. I mean, those types of things happen. It certainly draws attention to the fact that he's a player who has requested a trade. A couple of things. One, it makes you think the Bruins might be less likely to want to accommodate that. If he's going to play that way, they'd probably like to keep him. At the same time, it boosts his value up, so teams are probably kind of piquing their interest here, saying, oh, geez, maybe we should consider a trade for this guy if he's going to play like that. And in Debrusk's case, he's a talented kid. He just needs to learn to play a more consistent basis, which has been a knock on him the whole time. And obviously the Bruins have been hard on him at times, which is why I guess he can't keep a spot in the lineup on a consistent basis, which is probably why he wants out too. It's kind of a vicious cycle, right? You do the right things, you work hard, you get the consistent results, nothing changes, you get to keep your spot, everybody's happy. But when you can't do that, it's at the end of the day, it's a business. It's about wins and losses. And when you're not contributing, then the team has to find a way to put the best product on the ice. So at this point, though, Pierre LeBrun's checked in with Debrusk's agent, and they said there's been no change of heart. That there's no, the trade request is still available. It's still something he wants to have done. So certainly you have to think, though, that part of the issue, according to LeBrun, which makes a lot of sense, is his qualifying offer. He's a pending restricted free agent, and his qualifying offer is around $4.4 million, and that's kind of scaring teams off. Certainly they are concerned that he won't sign an extension ahead of time, and he'll take his qualifying offer, which is probably more than they see him being valued at right now due to the inconsistent play, and the numbers haven't been great. Even though he had a hat trick last night, the overall stats, the last year or two are, up and down and not fantastic. So there is a possibility, according to his agent and Pierre LeBrun, that they might come to an agreement on a short extension, which puts him past that, and it might be able to sign at a lower number than that qualifying offer, which would certainly make him even more valuable being traded with term. Might be better for the Bruins too. If he'll agree to it and sign a contract for less than the QO, then that's better. That'll boost his value, increase the likelihood of getting a trade, and if he continues to play the way he has, we should be able to see the Bruins facilitate a deal and get something back in return that they're fond of as well. And even though they might not be crazy about trading him, at the same time, at least it brings back something else that they can work with here going into the playoffs. So the Flyers situation, certainly some updates there on Claude Giroux. According to Pierre LeBrun, he says Giroux still hasn't gone to Chuck Fletcher and kind of said, okay, I'm ready for this. Let's get a deal done and find a new home for me type of thing. But we've seen other sources, including NRD on the Cold Stove podcast, indicating that they have had those conversations. He has kind of narrowed down a few teams, including the Avalanche, the Stars, and the Blues. So certainly some conflicting info in that regard. But at the end of the day, I don't see a trade happening until Giroux's played game number 1,000, which is only going to be, I believe, is like 3 or 4 days ahead of the deadline. So I don't suspect we're going to see Giroux move early. I think he will be a deadline day deal. And from the other info that we had been listening to before, that the teams involved are the ones we've talked about already. So to me, that's likely going to happen. But according to LeBrun, it's not not going to happen anytime soon, which I do concur with. When it comes to Rasmus Ristolainen, apparently the Flyers are making a push to try to re-sign him. There's been some talks. They're offering somewhere in the neighborhood of about $6.3 million on a longer term deal. So to me, that's mind-boggling. I don't understand why they would want to pay that much. There was some talk they might trade Ristolainen if he wasn't going to sign, and maybe look to acquire another defenseman, maybe like a Jeff Petrie if he's still available at the deadline. Not really sure that makes a ton of sense now either. There's more talk that Petrie might actually end up staying in Montreal. So we'll see where that goes. That's a tough situation to gauge. But at the end of the day, Ristolainen, to me, that's not a great contract in my opinion. But the Flyers, they seem to like him. They want to keep him. But Ristolainen's thing is he wants to get a taste of the playoffs after being so long in Buffalo. I'm not so sure he really wants to go through another long stretch without playoff hockey, which I totally understand and don't blame him. But at the same time, the Flyers don't appear to be going through a rebuild. They look to be trying to do a reset. So I can see them trying to be aggressive in the trade market, get some cap flexibility, maybe hit some free agents if they can. I think we're going to try to do a quick turnaround. That's the impression we got from the last meeting here from media availability from Chuck Fletcher and ownership. So I'm not so sure that there's not a good chance that Ristolainen could sign. I mean, if they're offering him that kind of money and they sell him on the idea of what they're going to do to get this team turned around, then there's a good chance he could sign and end up coming off the trade market. Now, of course, the Blackhawks officially introduced Kyle Davidson today as their new full-time general manager. He's already been in the role for some time as an interim GM, and after going through a bunch of interviews and searching around in various NHL markets and outside the NHL, looking at various candidates, they've come to the conclusion he is their guy on a full-time basis going forward. So, of course, they had an introduction and media availability today, and he did confirm that this is going to be a Blackhawks rebuild, and he also wouldn't put a timeline on it. So it's not necessarily going to be a quick rebuild. It's probably early in the process for him to really give a definitive timeline, but certainly you have to think that a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury, who's 37 years old on the final year of his contract, front and center as a potential deadline deal. Now, of course, on Insider Trading tonight on TSN, they were indicating from Chris Johnson that right now, even though Fleury only has a 10-team trade protection in his contract, it's believed that the Blackhawks are going to do right by him and only trade him if he wants to be traded. They will discuss any potential deal with him. And right now, he said that it's leaning like Fleury might not want to move, that he might actually finish out the season in Chicago and weigh his options out in the offseason on what to do next, if he's going to continue playing, retire, sign somewhere else, or whatever he's going to do. And you have to wonder, maybe I can understand, okay, Fleury's had a lot of playoff hockey in his career. He's getting older. Maybe he would rather just have the playoffs, kind of off and be able to have an early off season and kind of, have more time to think about his future. Maybe that's what he wants. But at the end of the day, you have to think that, that he still has that burning desire to chase a Stanley Cup. And the reports coming from TSN saying that maybe he's going to finish out in Chicago, you have to think maybe they were fed that information to push his value up, and maybe they're not getting any offers that they really like. That happens a lot when teams are not getting good offers. They will put certain information out through the media to kind of get other teams thinking about reconsidering. So to me, that could be very well what that is. Obviously, Darren Dreger went on to talk about the fact that there's certainly going to have some conversations with Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane as well. They're going to be entering the final year of their contracts at $10.5 million. Personally, I have to think Patrick Kane would have a ton of value, and if I'm Chicago, you might even have to eat some of that salary, but still, Patrick Kane at anywhere from $5.5 to $7 million is an excellent value. He's still performing at a high level. I think there would be no issue in trading Kane. Toews might be a little bit more complicated, but at the same time, they do have a full no move, so it's going to be entirely in their corner. They'll have to approve any deal. I'm not necessarily going to say that this is something we're going to see before the trade deadline, given their huge salaries and the long-term implications on the franchise. I mean, you can never say never, but I think the odds of a deadline deal for either of those guys are probably pretty slim, but it's something that we could likely see in the offseason. But of course, if they decide that they absolutely want to finish that contract out in Chicago, they have that right. They have the no trade protection that they can veto any deal. But I would think that after a long stretch and long successful careers in Chicago, multiple Stanley Cups and everything, seeing what this team has to go through now to rebuild its image off the ice, rebuild its roster on the ice, that they would do right by the franchises and let them recoup some assets in their return. So Kane would bring in a good haul. You have to think a team like maybe next year, like the Rangers, would he want to go home to Buffalo? Hard to say. There's lots of teams kind of retooling and looking for some veteran help that way. And Kane could certainly help a lot of teams. So, like the Rangers come to mind just for a potential reunion with Artemi Panarin. Those two were magic in Panarin's first season there. So, that's just a thought on my part. There's no link in that regard. When it comes to Toews, it's hard to say as well. Even a guy like Dominic Kubalik, certainly more likely to be traded. He had a really solid start to his career, was a 30-goal scorer. Kind of cooled down some. I don't think that Alex DeBrincat is completely untouchable, but I think out of everybody on that team, along with probably a Kirby Dach, Seth Jones, they're probably the ones that kind of stick around and ride this out as be the kind of the leaders in the the core going forward here, kind of take over the reins from Toews and Kane, so to speak. Obviously, Jones in that long-term deal is not going anywhere. DeBrincat, as much as they would get a really big return, I don't know that they really entertain that unless there's just an offer they can't refuse. I'm not convinced he's a completely untouchable, but pretty much, in my opinion, I think is where things are at. But could Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, Marc-Andre Fleury all exit Chicago here in the near future as this team enters a whole new chapter with a new general manager, and we see this team rebuild here after a long stretch of successful hockey. Obviously, the last few years have been kind of tamed down a bit, but it's time for this team to unfortunately go through a little bit more pain on the ice here as they go through this rebuild. So we'll see where Davidson goes with this, and if these veterans move on soon enough. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.